Commissioner Thorne, will you give tonight's invocation, please?
Everybody bow their heads, please. Dear Heavenly Father, we come here tonight and we ask that you give us the understanding and the wisdom to have a discussion about the matters in front of us. And that when we leave here tonight, Lord, that you guide us all home back to our families safe. In your name, amen.
Amen.
Roll call.
Commissioner Ashworth,
Here.
Commissioner Thorne,
Here.
Commissioner Clark,
Here.
Commissioner Carter,
Here.
Commissioner Jordan,
Here.
Commissioner Hawkins,
Here.
Commissioner Skeen,
Here.
Commissioner Brumbelow.
Here.
Has everyone had a chance to look over the August 10th minutes? And if so, do I have a motion to approve?
Motion to approve.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Commissioner Clark,
Yay.
Commissioner Thorne,
Here. Aye.
Commissioner Jordan,
Aye.
Commissioner Brumbelow,
Aye.
Commissioner Hawkins,
Aye.
Commissioner Ashworth,
Aye.
Commissioner Skeen.
Aye.
And has everyone had a chance to look over the minutes from the special meeting on August 24th? And if so, do I have a motion?
So move.
Second.
Second.
Commissioner Clark,
Aye.
Commissioner Thorne,
Aye.
Commissioner Jordan,
Aye.
Commissioner Brumbelow,
Aye.
Commissioner Hawkins,
Aye.
Commissioner Ashworth,
Aye.
Commissioner Skeen.
Aye.
All right, Mr. Page, our first item is zoning map amendment from the R12 Single Family Residential District to the C2 Highway Commercial District. And that will be for Mr. Cal Wilkins of Crossroads LLC.
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to recuse myself from this vote.
One moment, Mr. Page is, Commissioner Clark recuses himself.
Okay, we did them together. Okay.
Okay, ready? Ready.
As the chairman mentioned, this is a rezoning application. The subject property is currently zoned in the R12 Single Family Residential District, and they are seeking to rezone the property to C2 Highway Commercial District. Basically, if you will recall, some of the older members were on the board at the time that the applicant submitted a preliminary plat for Crossroads North Subdivision. And at that time, they left out a 5-acre piece of property there on the corner of Green Tea and Highway 51 as not being part of that plat. And that is the subject property that we're dealing with here tonight. Basically, this property has had kind of a storied history in a way. It started out, I think, originally as a commercial property that then became a residential property, and has developed, residentially up to this point in time. Now, as I mentioned, the 4.85 acres is located on the southeast corner of Highway 51 and Green Tea. The future land use map for the city currently reflects the subject property in the single-family medium-density dependent land use designation. This category is to provide for the development of single-family detached dwellings on moderate-sized lots, and the category also includes the type of single-family residences known as patio homes, townhouses, condos, and zero-lot line homes. Single-family medium-density residential developments should be located on collector or arterial roadways, and the zoning classification recommended by the General Development Plan for properties identified in the single-family medium-density dependent land use designation is either the R8 single-family residential district medium density or the R10 Single Family Residential District, medium density. Therefore, the applicant's request to rezone the property to the C2 Highway Commercial District would not conform to the recommendations of the General Development Plan, since the plan recommends either the R8 or R10 district as the preferred zoning district for this land use designation. Now, in your staff report, of course, there are three criteria that the Planning Commission is to consider in determining if a property should be rezoned. First, how the proposed amendment would conform to the General Development Plan. Secondly, why the existing zoning district classification of the property in question is inappropriate or improper. And then finally, that major economic, physical, or social changes, if any, have occurred in the vicinity of the property in question that were not anticipated by the General Development Plan and have substantially altered the basic character of the area, which make the proposed amendment to the zoning district map appropriate. Now, you have the applicant's responses to those three criteria in your staff report, as well as staff comments concerning the three criteria. One of the things that I would note, we have included for your review in the staff report a copy of the R12 Single Family Residential District regulations, as well as a copy of the C2 Highway Commercial District regulations for your comparison. Of course, in considering any rezoning, the issue is not so much what the individual applicant may want to do specifically with the property, but the question must be considered in terms of everything that is allowable in C2. Because you want to be sure that, even though the applicant may wish to develop the property, say, as a convenience store, and you may find that, perfectly acceptable, you want to be sure that you also find perfectly acceptable everything else that's permitted in C2. Because once the property is zoned, then anything that's on that list could conceivably go there if plans change over time. One of the things that, I do want to be sure and kind of touch on, which I will note really is not something, I'm not mentioning this because it's particularly applicable to the issue of whether the property should be rezoned, but I feel it is something that I need to bring to the attention of both the commission and the applicant, that if the property does wind up being zoned C2, there is a 30-foot buffer yard requirement where C2 and residential come together. That includes not only landscaping, but an opaque barrier that must be either a masonry wall or a 6-foot earthen berm, in addition to some landscaping provisions that are included in the zoning ordinance. I think it's important to note this because, that's obviously, you're talking about 30 feet on the east side of this property and 30 feet on the south side of this property, because it adjoins a residential in both of those boundaries, okay? So you're going to be chopping 30 feet off of that south property line and 30 feet off of that east property line, and that needs to be considered as part of the design of what might ultimately come to be. In the staff report, I've given you a proposed motion to approve with suitable findings I've given you a motion to deny with suitable findings. And then, of course, if you feel like you need additional time to consider the application or additional information that you do not have available to you at this point in time, you always have the option to table the application until the next meeting to allow that to take place. So with that, that's my report, unless anyone has any questions.
Any questions or comments for Mr. Page? Thank you, Mr. Page. Will the applicant please come forward stating your name and address?
I'm George Reedy, 175 East Commerce, Hernando, Mississippi, representing the applicant, Cal Wilkins. Bob Ginn is also his engineer, is present here if we have any technical questions. I think I know most everybody here, and first time in front of this new board. Mr. Ashworth's been here before, so I remember from years ago, so hope to get to know some of you that I don't already have experience with. Most of you I do, I think. I'm going to give you a little bit more background on this, because strangely enough, I've been involved in this for a long time, DeSoto Council. And then this plan that was presented and approved by the city long ago in 2007, this was a planned commercial unit development. And that was at the behest of Bob Barber, which was working in conjunction with, who was the city planner at that time, who was working in conjunction with Jim Flanagan, because back then there was believed to be a great deal of interest and need in corporate headquarters campuses, and this piece of property and the Banks and Company property, which is now AWG, was both zoned that way based on all that planning and the needs that we saw. And I was involved at that point with the plan with DeSoto County Development Council. So obviously that plan was put in, and then there never could get anybody on either property to be interested in DeSoto County, and then we had the economy collapsed. When the economy started to recover, in 2017 there was substantial interest in residential, right? But that's important that there was a PUD on a commercial, because that means there's already been a finding by the city that a change in circumstances and a change in the neighborhood and a change in that area out there constituted what's necessary under the law to allow for a zoning change, right? And that was way back in 2006, okay? Now, because there wasn't any interest in doing the campus community, they came back to the planning department again in the previous, Mr. Briley, who we unfortunately lost, and every one of y'all knew Mr. Briley and what a great guy he was. He recommended to them that they would have to change the zoning, to Mr. Wilkins, excuse me, that they would need to change the zoning on the entire property. I wasn't involved in that, but I'll just say in all deference to Mr. Briley, and certainly not saying anything about anybody because everybody got different personal opinions, but based on my experience and my knowledge of the law, which most of you know I was circuit judge one time and I got to decide on all these things, you can't amend PUDs. So I believe what should have been recommended was an amendment to the PUD to change most of it to residential, because the original allowed for commercial and mixed use, which allowed for some residential in the original PUD. And in fact, Section A allowed for some residential mixed with commercial use, okay? But in any event, based on what Mr. Briley represented to the client that needed to be done, an application was submitted to rezone it from commercial back down to R12. It originally had been AR. If you lived here, you got gray hair like me, you know it was all agricultural residential, right? We all knew Green Tea Store and the family that lived across the road in the big old house that was over there. And though all of that R12 has been sold, 100% of it has been sold, except for the about 30 acres that the preliminary plat has been approved by the Planning Commission, I guess, for about 30 acres, and all that's left is this 4.85 acres at the corner, right? So, I'll just have to tell you, of course, I was looking online, I was confused. We did not have access to the staff report. In the past, Hernando has provided the staff report in advance so you could be prepared to respond when you made a presentation. But we weren't given a copy of the staff report and didn't know what the position was to be. And I'll just have to say, I may be completely mistaken. I'm sure Mr. BJ is right. I've known BJ for years and years because I used to work with him over at Olive Branch, and we were always able to get things worked out. But on what I could see on the internet, I thought that the comprehensive plan showed it as commercial, office, mixed use at that corner, on the southeast corner. I also think that to me, it looked like, again, on the small map on the internet, as best I could tell, it looked like the future land use was designated for the same thing: employment, professional services, office, commercial, mixed use. I will tell you this, of course, the city is not bound by it, but the 269 corridor plan that was agreed to and accepted by all the counties that are on the 269 corridor and did all the planning for it designates it as non-residential, neighborhood commercial, or highway commercial mixed use. So I would submit to the board, to the commission, that it is in compliance. What we're asking you to change it to is back to effectively what it was already, and then that it does comply with the future use plans. And I would also submit that we already have definitive proof that the city is intending for it to go that way, because you've approved C2 on the northeast corner and the northwest corner, and I think maybe the southwest corner. But I know you have on the northeast corner and the northwest corner, because there's a signs up for the Exxon station that's going to go in across the street to the north. And of course, we've got the gas station and the restaurant on the northwest corner, right? So that's clear evidence of the change in the neighborhood, the change in the circumstances, and there's been a great many other changes. As we all know, the AWG was changed from the same kind of zoning that this PUD had on, this property had on it, to just general commercial, so they could build the warehouse up there, and AWG's been there. The state, I'm sure on this planning commission, y'all are well aware of all that, because it came through here, of all the road improvements that are planned to be made, the light that's going in on there. So it's everything that would be necessary for highway commercial, which this is already in place, planned by the city, planned by the state to go into there. The infrastructure's there, everything is there. This is honestly, that is simpler than the presentations I feel like I used to have to make, because historically the proof has already been made for going back to what it was. Again, the city adopted it, the planning commission adopted it in 2007, and the Board of Aldermen adopted it in 2007, that those changes in the neighborhood necessary for a rezoning had been proved way back then. And we all know, because we live here and see it, how it's even changed since then. I think there's, back in 2007, there wasn't many houses there, and how many houses are up in that area now? There's over 2,300, within a mile and a half of this, there are 2,300 homes already approved, and another 200 to follow. Very few retail services in the area. Again, as somebody that lives here, the city went around me. I guess they didn't want me out there where my house is, but I mean, I consider myself a resident of Hernando, and I certainly pay taxes in Hernando because I own property in Hernando. My office is in Hernando, as y'all all know. And I consider myself a resident of Hernando, and I just have to say, and I always start everything saying this, having grown up here, I wish we didn't have any of this crowd, but we do, and so we need to plan for it effectively. And a development and allowing commercial at this corner, all the way across on Green Tea, and especially at the Mackingvale, that is something I believe, as a member of the community, that this city just desperately needs to do. We need to shift some commercial traffic and activity away from the town square here because of the traffic problems we have. And everybody that has to function here every day is aware of what I'm talking about. So I just think this is something positive for it. I think this is, every single requirement to rezone has been presented and met. And I think that there is a substantial need for it, because there is no commercial up in that area, and we need to be shifting some of the commercial to that area, and this could help us do that. Does anybody have any questions they would like to ask me?
Questions or comments for Mr. Reedy?
We're just talking about the 4.85 acres on the corner, right?
That is it.
Not that 30
Nothing
acres.
else. The 35 acres, I think, is
That's already been
planned,
approved, right?
planned residential. It's already planned as residential. It's going to be left as R12, and we're aware of the setback and the screening requirements.
Buffer.
When you touch,
Yeah.
when commercial touches a residential area. And I just say, that's part of, that's not, that really doesn't have anything to do with the zoning, the issue before you guys tonight, right? That's something that they have to come back for preliminary and final plat approval.
Mr. Page, my question would be directed to you. In the previous hearings on the same property, was it designated where we subdivided out? It was all designated as R12, but we subdivided out that 4.85 acres from the rest of the land during that. So this would be its own lot in that subdivision. Is that correct, or am I mistaken?
You're a little mistaken.
Okay.
Not a lot mistaken, but a
Okay.
little mistaken.
Little, good.
You know, basically, if you'll recall, the issue that we were developing, dealing with at that time, as Mr. Reedy mentioned in his presentation, the whole property was rezoned to R12, okay? But the original preliminary plat only encompassed sections 1 and 2 of Crossroads subdivision, okay? So when the desire, arose to develop the additional 30 acres residentially, we didn't have a preliminary plat, we had to start at that point, and so that's what we have done so far is the preliminary plat. Now, that preliminary plat, as I mentioned in my presentation, did not include that 4.85 acres. In fact, I'm not sure, I thought I included that in here, but, it basically was identified as future development. And that was all that was said at that particular point in time. But it was not considered as part of the Crossroads North subdivision. But that did not change the zoning,
Correct.
that just
Correct.
left it out as far as development purposes went. And that's why we have this application, in order to rezone it, to the commercial zoning.
Thank you.
So the entire thing had already been rezoned R12
Right.
when it was done.
Right. And that's one of the tricky things about this deal, and I certainly agree with Mr. Reedy that probably the appropriate approach would have been to amend the PUD. But that didn't happen, so that's what we're dealing with, and so, it's kind of one of those deals where, the criteria were proven to rezone the entire parcel commercial originally from AR, but then you had to prove the same thing again to rezone the whole property to R12, okay?
The reverse.
So now, we're being confronted with a situation of whether or not that was an error relative to the corner.
Well, I'll just,
So
I'll
it's,
point out to the commissioners that Mr. Page just agreed with me, right? It was mistaken, it was honestly based, but it was just mistaken advice that you would have to rezone the whole thing instead of amending the PUD.
right,
So that's really kind of the final point I would make to you guys, right, that, and ladies, that it would be really unfair to Mr. Wilkins he did what he was asked to do by the planning department at that time, to deny him the change back to what it already was, since it clearly has met all the qualifications for being changed to a commercial, a C2 zoning.
Any other questions or comments for Mr. Reedy?
I guess, I would, one thing I would point out, and we've got the 2020 plan update in here. I guess this is just a general, something I noted. The 2020 plan update is in here, and it notes that this is intended to be an urban area, an urban neighborhood. And it looks like there's commercial development on the edge of residential like
Well,
anticipate.
if you, and that's true, first. I think if you read the portion that talks about the urban area, basically what it is, the urban neighborhoods, they're identified as primarily residential, and they're existing traditional neighborhoods and then new traditional neighborhoods, okay? So I just wanted to point that out because calling it an urban area is a little bit misleading, in that it's basically saying that it should be traditional residential neighborhoods, And of course, if you look at the map that's attached, it essentially, again, shows the whole property as residential in terms of the tan color that's identified there. And that's, again, straying a little bit from the application at hand, but that's one of the reasons why we really need you guys to go over that draft plan very closely, to make sure that, obviously, if this change were to be approved tonight, our plan would already be out of date, before it's even adopted. So you want to be sure, that you're in total agreement with what the future land use map shows, not only here, but, elsewhere in town. Like I said, that doesn't have anything to do with the application at hand. It's just something having to do with another topic that's later on our agenda tonight.
I know that it doesn't apply tonight with the plat, but when you were talking about the buffer between commercial and residential, does the buffer, that 30-foot buffer, does that affect the commercial property, or does that affect the residential?
Commercial.
property?
Commercial, yeah.
So it's on the,
It
it'll be
would
on the
be-
commercial plat?
Yeah, it would be, whatever development happened, it'd have to come back here for final approval. The buffer would have to be provided by the commercial property.
On the commercial
And the
side.
screen would have to be
Okay.
built by the commercial property, not the landowners.
Right.
Okay.
And to tell you the truth, the main reason I mentioned that was because, in terms of developing the property, it's been my experience over the years that a lot of times when people are looking at the economics of a development, that they start out kind of with what they feel like they need to make off the development, to make a profit, and that's understandable from a business standpoint. But sometimes they're not familiar with all of the regulations that come into play in developing that property, such that it may affect how much of a building you can get on there, in terms of square footage. So whenever I have an opportunity, to try and bring that kind of information to an applicant's attention, I try to do that.
And I think a good example of the buffer we're talking about, not in likeness of this, probably in size and stuff, but where Fairway Mortgage was, because it backed up to those residential homes too, they had to do the same thing on the commercial side. So, small example of what would be put in place. Any other questions or comments? Thank you, Mr. Reedy. Is there anyone here for or against this application? And if so, will you please come forward? Do I have a motion?
I'll make a motion to recommend approval to the Board of Aldermen of a rezoning requested by Mr. Bob Ginn with Land Development Resources LLC, representing Cal Wilkins, Crossroads DeSoto LLC, the owner of the property of a 4.85 acre parcel of land located on the southeast corner of US Highway 51 and Green Tea Road in Section 1, Township 3 South, Range 8 West, in its current zoning in the R12 Single Family Residential District, medium density to the C2 Highway Commercial District, based upon the following findings, 1, 2, and 3.
Do you have a second?
Second.
Keith. Keith.
All of us down here.
Russell.
Commissioner Clark?
He's
Oh,
recused.
sorry. Commissioner Thorne?
Aye.
Commissioner Jordan?
Aye.
Commissioner Brumbelow?
Aye.
Commissioner Hawkins?
Aye.
Commissioner Ashworth?
Aye.
Commissioner Skeen?
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you. And lady. Y'all excuse me, I'm running a national with colors and labor.
Congrats.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Ashworth, will you grab Adam for us?
All right. Are you good?
Yes, you can come back from banishment.
All right, Mr. Page, we got item number 2, required for a zoning variance to allow 7 parking spaces rather than the required 35 parking spaces. This would be a variance of 28 parking spaces relating to the proposed construction of a self-storage mini warehouse facility. This is located at 331 US Highway 51 South.
Okay. This is the first of 3 variances that we will be looking at tonight that all deal with the same property. And as the chairman noted in his opening comments, this is a request for a variance concerning parking. The ordinance currently requires that many warehouses provide 1 parking space for each 10 compartments must be provided. Under this provision, the proposed self-storage facility will provide 350 storage units, which would generate a total parking requirement of 35 parking spaces, providing only the 7 fixed spaces reflected on the submitted site plan would require a variance of 28 parking spaces. Now, one of the things that I would like to mention regarding this is that many storage type developments are relatively low traffic generators. Anybody who's ever had a storage unit, knows that, if you go by there a couple of times a month, maybe, that's fairly typical. In terms of reviewing this, one of the things that I found was that the city of Olive Branch, the city of South Haven, and the city of Horn Lake all require substantially less parking for that purpose. All 3 cities require only 1 parking space for every 50 units. As a result, if you used that standard for parking, the 350 units would render basically 7 parking spaces, which is what the applicant is providing on the site plan at this time. I would also note that, one thing about storage units is that, of course, the whole site will largely be paved, everything within the facility itself, will be paved. And if you, got out your magnifying glass to check the site plan, there is, in many cases, 55 feet between buildings, such that there's substantial amount of space, in between most of the buildings. And of course, again, if you've ever had a storage unit, people are creatures of habit, and if they can park, they're going to park closest to where their storage unit is. For example, on this particular site plan, the large building that's in the center of the facility, is going to be a climate control storage building. And it has 4 entrances, one on each side of the building. So I think you can expect that people will, be parking at the entrance closest to their particular storage unit. So in a sense, the whole facility is parking in that respect. I also would note that, many of the outer buildings are for RV storage. They're not mini storage units per se. So basically, the buildings themselves are parking in that respect. At any rate, again, the question can legitimately be asked, even though the variance may be applicable to the current use of the property, what if the nature of the use of the property changes? We want to look at that as a practical standpoint. Is there sufficient additional space that additional parking may be added if a change in use were to occur in the future? Again, having noted that in most cases, it's 55 feet between buildings, yes, there would be opportunities for additional fixed parking, if it were striped at that time. So I think the answer to that question is yes. And of course, any person aggrieved by any decision of the Planning Commission may appeal within 10 days to the City of Hernando Board of Aldermen, who may affirm, reverse, remand, or modify the decision as may be proper. Parties aggrieved by a decision of the City of Hernando Board of Aldermen may seek review by a court of record as provided by law. If an appeal is made, the appeal shall be submitted in writing to the Office of Planning. Again, I have given you a motion to approve the variance with the suitable findings, a motion to deny with the suitable findings, and again, if you feel like you need additional information or additional time, you always have the option to table the item until the next meeting. So with that, that's my report, unless anyone has any questions.
Any questions or comments for Mr. Page? Mr. Page, do you know currently what, just a couple of the other storage units where they're at in parking spaces? And I understand this is an RV storage, but I think of the one on 51, not sure the name of it, but I know they store RVs there. Hampton Storage on McCracken, they store RVs there. I'm just curious on where we're at with parking spaces, because I was unable to get by there and count them out, but do you happen to know?
Well, I believe that the applicant, this is actually his second self-storage facility here in Hernando, so I think he could probably respond to that question.
Sounds good, thank you. Any other questions or comments for Mr. Page?
The RV storage doesn't count towards the 30.
No. And if you think about it, if somebody wanted to, like, I don't know, if they had an RV that was self-propelled, if they came up to get their RV and they pulled it out, I'm sure they would park their vehicle, in the vacated spot, where the RV was. And if it's a towed RV, I'm sure they would come up with their truck to pick up their RV and the whole thing would leave. So, it doesn't really have a parking component to it, other than for the RV itself.
Any other questions or comments? Thank you, Mr. Page. Will the applicant please come forward, state your name and address?
Mr. Chairman, I'm Ben Smith, 2700 Stonebrook in Nesbit. If I could, I need to hand out some things, if I could. And by the way, this handout that I'm passing out will apply for the next two items on your agenda tonight. So there's several things there. Each one, I've got one for each one. So. I'm gonna give BJ one.
I was going to say, got one for me too? Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Oops,
You need it?
I have another one here. No, I have enough.
Thank you, sir.
If I could, these are either Google or Google Earth, or this is the county GIS site. But the first one you look at, it was questioned, well, how many parking spaces are there in some typical other locations? What I've done here is I've taken the one on Hernando Self-Storage on McInville, which Mr. Burrow developed. And if you look at that area, you see that I don't know what time of day this was taken, but that time of the day, there was one vehicle parked, and there's 3 empty spaces. If you go to the Hamilton mini storage on McCracken Road, which is owned by Trip President, you see that he has 3 parking spaces in front of his office. Those 4 you see parked there are vans that are for rent. So the one on McCracken Road has 3 parking spaces. The other one is Oak Tree, which is on Highway 51 near the railroad track, and you'll see that there's 1, 2, 3, 4 parking spaces at that site. And at that particular day, there was only 1 vehicle parked there. So to answer your questions is that anywhere from basically 3 to 4 parking spaces are provided at other mini storage sites in Hernando. I also went and looked up on the internet, and I went to the town of Collierville, which is your 4th sheet in there, and said, what is Collierville, which is a very progressive community, what is their requirements? And you'll notice it's 1 space per each employee. And I think, Jim, you had 1 employee? 1 employee. So if this was being developed in Collierville, you'd have 1 parking space would be required. Also, I looked up on the Memphis website, and their zoning ordinance, and that's the next sheet that you see, and self-storage, and it's 1 per 250 square feet of office space. The office space in this development will be between 400 and 500 square feet, so that's two parking spaces. We're providing 7, so I think that there's a little bit of overkill on our part. If it was in, as BJ mentioned, Horn Lake, South Haven, Olive Branch, we would meet those requirements. But I think your zoning ordinance, it needs to be on, as far as self-storage units are concerned, needs to be updated. It's out of date, but we're going to ask for a variance because this is all that's needed. I've owned many storages before. I've rented spaces before, and what BJ says is correct. About every square feet of that area in a mini storage is for parking. You pull up to your unit and you just open your door up and you're out of the way. Either you're right in front of it or you're right next to the unit. So it becomes a parking space. So all that you really need is for someone to come in and park and go in and rent for the first time. Most of many storages today, you operate with your iPhone. You just get your pass in and out, and you don't need a parking space to get in. So I think it's unnecessary to have 35 parking spaces. We think 7 is overkill, but we do have 7 parking spaces. I'll ask any question you may have, but.
Mr. Smith, my first question is gonna be in regards to the Hernando self-storage. You just got the front part of that in the back.
He
I've been
does
on
have
the
some.
property, there's also parking spaces, so in total, how many do you have, not just 3?
We have probably about 4 or 5 in that, so
Okay.
I put probably 7 or 8 over there.
Yeah, I was counting about 6 or 7
Yeah.
in the back, so, how many units do you have in that one building?
3, on the new one?
Yes, sir, on, well, no,
No, the one
on,
on
McAville.
30.
How many is in the other one?
330 units,
How many's in the one on McIntyre?
330 units.
330, okay. 350 in this one,
350.
okay.
So in total, we got 11 spaces on that one on McAville, is that correct?
That sounds accurate.
Okay.
We also, of course, this is an RV also, so we do have spaces out front. We got a 30-foot drive out front. You can park either 2 or 3 RVs out front. While they park and go inside and sign up for the first time. But we do have parking for RVs at the front. It's not part of the 7. This is not the 7. So I think the 7 parking spaces more than covers a modern or mini storage and RV storage facility like Mr. Burrow is going to build here.
You mentioned I guess it was the Memphis website about the number of square foot per employees.
Yes.
That's 2 spaces, and you've got 7. So out of the 7 you're proposing, 2 of those would be for employees?
There's one
So really, there'll be
employee.
only 5 left.
Yeah, it's
Just 1 employee.
one employee.
So one, so it'll be 6 left.
Yes,
One be handicapped,
yes,
so we're down to 5.
yes.
Mr. Smith, do you happen to know the number of units in Hamilton and Oak Tree by chance? Just ballpark or?
No, I don't.
Okay.
I guess I should ask BJ earlier, is there any rationale for the number of units in the current ordinance?
Units or parking?
Parking, yeah, parking per units, I guess.
I can't really, it's one of those things where I can tell you that that the zoning ordinance here in Hernando and the zoning ordinance in Olive Branch, South Haven, and Horn Lake all came out of a model zoning ordinance that was adopted by those 4 cities and the county in 1980. Now, of course, there have been changes, over the time since then. The 1 space, for every 50 compartments that you see in Olive Branch, South Haven, and Horn Lake, that actually came out of the 1980 model ordinance. I don't know why Hernando picked a different standard. I don't know if it happened, when they adopted that ordinance or at some time between 1980 and now. Shoot, it's been 40 years, so. But as to the rationale behind it, I can't tell you, what it was. And the thing is, in looking at the many storages that we have in town, it does not appear that it was ever applied.
That was what I was just thinking.
Yeah,
It seems like if 35 was in the ordinance, that every mini storage had to come get a zoning variance to get to where they're at now.
Right.
That was my question. Did they go through the variance procedure? And I don't think so.
Considering the size of this design, 7 seems like a low number, given what we were just talking about, the space for an employee, 1 handicap, that takes 2 out of your 7. Is there a way to compromise and?
Well, I think we,
Like 9 or 10?
I think when we voted, there was a variance that we did on the Hernando storage unit for the same thing. And I think that's what I was just asking Russell about as far as numbers, because he was doing the math. But that looks to be one per every 30 units.
Is that the one over on Mackinville?
Mackinville and Monteith. Do y'all have a number on traffic that comes in your Hernando? Well, let's use that one for example. I mean, do you have,
I mean, on average, you're probably 7 or 8 cars a day that come through there.
not at one
Like
time
it-
though?
It's been said, you know, they'll pull up to the side door, you can go in the side door, a few are gonna go to the parking place and then actually go in.
Correct.
Right.
They park in the driveway.
Well, to your point, the only time that people park are typically first time signing up,
Exactly.
or if they've got family members coming and a family member might park out front when they go in and help them. I've done that.
But things have changed in the mini storage business. I mean, it's strictly, your iPhone's got a code, or
Yep.
you get in, you get out. You don't need to go to the office. Some of them do not have an office at all. And oddly, I've seen several with no fencing. I mean, it's just wide open. And the theory being there that you can see everything going on. So, yeah, I've seen them in Memphis. There's no fence around them. So things have changed. I think the thing is that this mini storage business has changed since that ordinance was adopted, the zoning ordinance was adopted. And it's just, like Jim says, 4 or 5 trips a month. You know, you might make 4 trips a month. But we think 7, Jim thinks 7, and his experience on McInville, 7 is more than adequate for his business.
Well, this one's bigger than the one on Mackinville, right?
Well, it's 2,500 square feet bigger on the bigger building, and then the covered parking obviously is a new aspect of it. But it kind of stands alone, the covered parking, because they're either in their unit or
Right.
they're not.
Well,
But you have 350 units in the new one compared to the 330,
Correct, yes.
depending on they're covered or
Yeah.
not, so.
well, from the RV standpoint, the first time you drive it over, somebody's coming with you, because you gotta get home after you park it.
Yeah, RV, usually 2 vehicles.
Right.
Will come in with an RV. And they'll usually follow the RV in and park at the same spot. Because they'll take things, I own an RV too, you park there and you take things out of the RV and you put it in your truck or you put it in your passenger vehicle and you leave, so. But we think 7 is more than adequate.
Any other questions or comments for Mr. Smith?
I just want to ask other commissioners, just based on a little bit of math we've been talking about, and looking at the plan, is there a compromise that we can add 2 more spaces right there and just make it 9? That way you get your 7 spaces that equals out to the number of units. But then you've got 1 handicap and 1 for the employee, and you still get 7. So add 2 more on that left side. So it's 5 and 4. Just a thought.
I don't have a problem with that.
This may sound harsh, but I think you're just gonna end up with more empty spaces. They're not gonna be used. It's just, the history of this, the mini storage business says that, we'll look at the photos we have that shows that, this is typically during the day. And I think it's kind of telling that all three mini storages, the most that was at any one of those during the day was 1 vehicle.
But that's one shot in time, though.
Yeah.
It's just a camera,
Yeah,
one shot in time.
and the traffic in a mini storage is, you don't really have a peak time for this. They're 24-hour facilities, by the way. You know that. So you can access your your unit 24 hours a day, so. So the traffic, what little traffic there is spread out over 24 hours.
We probably have this one shut down at 10:30 most likely at night. So
They do.
You wouldn't have all night traffic.
What are you losing with the 2 additional spaces that he mentioned? I mean,
I'm sorry?
What are you losing with the 2 additional spaces that Mr. Thorne proposed, besides less grass to cut?
I don't think we're losing anything, we're just not gaining anything either.
What are you gaining by not having 2 extra spaces, extra grass?
Well, I mean, we could squeeze them in somewhere on the concrete, there's a lot of concrete out there. We could paint 2 lines, I'm sure, pick up 2 additional spaces. I just don't think they're needed.
We can put them inside or outside. I think the ones on McInville are inside, some of them are inside. So if you like some additional, we may add some, we have plenty of room on the inside.
Are y'all gonna have U-Hauls, rentals, truck rentals?
No,
We have Penske at the other side. You know, if we did, we would have them on the backside where they wouldn't be seen.
Yeah,
Probably
that's my only thinking on that is, you know, Trezevant parks his out in front.
correct.
I don't know what the ordinance says on that, but I know, I think there's some people frown on residents parking their trucks outside for long periods of time, so that might, you know, if you were to have 10, 15 parking spots and you have rental trucks, you know, it might be easy for you to park a rental truck out front, right? Like Trezevant does to advertise. It's just something for y'all.
No, you bring up an interesting point, because you just mentioned if you were to in the future rent rental trucks, they would be in the back. But that's another service which would then require additional parking.
Well, I think there's a couple of things come in play here. All right. You know, first, you know, which, something that has already occurred, okay, so for the new people on the board, you would not be familiar with this, but a mini storage does require a conditional use permit be approved, okay? And that particular approval occurred, you know, before the recent municipal election with the old planning commission, okay? The thing to keep in mind about that is, you know, when you approve a conditional use, you're approving it for what is being presented to you. And if there was nothing presented in that conditional use permit about renting trucks, for example, as a new service, that could not be done legally without coming back and amending the conditional use permit. Okay? You know, one of the things, you know, and I mean, preface this by saying this is not, doesn't have anything to do with Mr. Burrow, and it shouldn't be ascribed to him at all, okay? But, you know, sometimes people think, well, I got my approval, now I can go do whatever I want to do. No, that's not the way it works, okay? You get an approval for what you're asking for, and that's it. You know, if you want to do something different, or you want to change it, or you want to move something around, you got to come back and ask for permission to do that, okay? So, you know, that as an issue is not something that's available at this point in time. And to be quite frank, if they were to start, you know, parking rental trucks out there, that becomes a code enforcement issue, Kristen. You know, that, you know, could wind them up in court, you know, if they don't stop doing it, you know, so.
But the option to come back
Oh, yeah, they can always come back and.
for conditional use
Oh, yeah.
to then
Yeah,
ask
to-
for additional service
Right.
to the business.
basically to amend their permit. Yeah. But, you know, it's like anything else, they would have to come back to you, you know, to get that approval. It's a public hearing matter, just like, you know, these variances are a public hearing matter. You know, so there would be ads in the paper and notices sent out to adjoining property owners and so forth. You know, so it would not be, you know, any kind of, you know, necessarily quick turnaround type thing. So, probably more than you really wanted to know.
Thank you for sharing. I think in the past, in different elements, many storages or storage units being one, warehouses being another, we have all agreed that we probably feel Hernando's parking spaces per square footage or per unit is probably extensive. However, I think we've done a good job of meeting in the middle. And that would be my recommendation to this commission, is to consider the meeting in the middle aspect. And I think Commissioner Thorne had a good observation and good recommendation, but I just wanted to forward y'all that too, that we have met in the middle.
It'd be 9.
Okay, we agree.
9?
9, yes.
Anyone else have questions or comments for Mr.
I
Smith?
I have a question. If we're going to make 9, can they just arbitrarily draw a white line wherever they want to and call that a parking space? Or will the other 2 be in between where they've got it on the diagram? So, you understand what I mean? Like,
Yeah, Mr. Page, would this plat have to be, or this design have to be resubmitted with 2 spaces on it?
Well, something that, of course, is going on right now as part of the approval process is the certificate of development. And basically part of that is ensuring that everything that's being proposed is correct in relation to our regulations, okay? Yes, they could suggest a parking space other than right there in the front, but as long as it meets the requirements as far as, width and length and sufficient width for traffic aisles and so forth, yeah, it could be at a different location in the facility than just right there in front. Now, having said that, if that's important to your decision, then that is something that you would want to include in the motion.
Yeah,
because,
right in front is what I was thinking. I don't know if it's,
well, that's why I said that,
Yeah.
is, one thing to be, always conscious of, not just in terms of this application, but in any application, is that, if there's something out there that you think is important, then you need to be sure that you include it as a condition of your approval. Because if you don't, then, a guy can stand at the podium like Ben, and swear up and down all day long how they're gonna do this or they're gonna do that. But if you don't put it in your motion as a condition of approval that they have to do it that way, they can walk out the door and change their mind. So, that's always something you wanna be conscious of.
We'll add them out front. We'll add the 2 out front.
okay.
Any other questions or comments for Mr. Smith? Thank you, Mr. Smith.
All right.
Is there anyone here for or against this application? Please come forward. Do I have a motion?
Motion to approve zoning variance for Jim Burrow of Hernando Self-Storage. 2, owner of the property, to allow construction of a new self-storage facility, providing 9 fixed parking spaces rather than the required 35 spaces, for a variance of 26 parking spaces on the subject property identified as 3331 US Highway 51 South, parcel number 3086-2400.0-00013.02, a 5.70 acre tract located on the northwest corner of US Highway 51 and the entrance road to the city's Renaissance Park in Section 24, Township 3 South, Range 8 West, based upon the following findings: A, B, C, and D.
I may add, before we get a second, did you want to be specific in location of the parking spots?
Yes, thank you. two additional, I don't know, how do I say it?
Adjacent to the existing.
Adjacent to
to
the
the
existing,
proposed. All right.
hold on a minute, let's see, it'll be north.
Added to the
Added
buildings.
two to the three spots on the west side, the existing three spots on the west.
Do I have a second?
Second.
As I like to say, will always come out fine in the minutes.
Maybe.
Hopefully.
Commissioner Clark?
Aye.
Commissioner Thorne?
Aye.
Commissioner Jordan?
Aye.
Commissioner Brumbelow?
Aye.
Commissioner Hawkins? Commissioner Ashworth?
Aye.
Commissioner Skeen?
Aye.
Motion passes. All right, Mr. Page, item number 3 is an approval of a design review variance, not extend roof parapet wall along the front of the building, also located at 331 US Highway 51 South.
Okay, again, same location, same project. This is kind of a strange deal, and I'm sure the applicant can, address this in much greater detail than my intention is to do here. But basically, the way a mini storage is set up and the way this mini storage is set up, whether it's a mini storage building or a building where RVs are being parked, the only penetrations are inside the facility. There are no windows, there are no doors on the outside of the building, okay? So when you look at a building, you're just seeing this long, unbroken wall, basically, the whole length of the building, okay? What they are proposing as a design is to provide a parapet on the ends of the buildings and then along the rear of the buildings, but not on the front, okay? So basically, and of course, the buildings will have a sloped roof towards the front of the building, and so you'll have rainwater, basically sheet flowing off the building onto the asphalt parking, traffic aisle area between the buildings, okay? The design review ordinance requires that the parapet, or a parapet wall is used, that it continue on all four sides of the building as to, design, materials, colors, etc. So in order to pursue the design that they are proposing, this variance is required. As you may recall, again, some of the older members, we had a similar variance request submitted by Energy for an area that was on the backside of their building, actually. The argument that the applicant has made, is that, basically, since the whole facility is designed to be interior, focused interior, that where the parapet is being left off, there will be, that no one will really be able to see it, because it's on the inside of the facility and not the outside of the facility. So I think I'm going to leave that there and let the applicant maybe explain it a little better, because I kind of feel like maybe I'm not hitting it all here. But essentially, that's the report. Again, I have given you the applicant's responses and the staff's comments in your staff report on this application. I have also given you a proposed motion to approve with appropriate findings, to deny with appropriate findings, or, as you mentioned before, you always have the option to table if you find that necessary. So that's basically my report, unless anyone has any questions.
Questions or comments for Mr. Page? Thank you, Mr. Page. Will the applicant please come forward?
Ben Smith, 2700 Stonebrook in Nesbit. I put those up on the board, but you have some of the same, you got the same pictures in your packet that I held out. Let me make the first comment, is that the big building in the middle of this conditioned space, it has parapet walls on all four sides. So we're only talking about the RV storage units. The drainage goes to the inside of the project, to the inside, so the roof is sloped to the inside. What we're asking for is we're gonna put parapet on all three sides except that side that's on the inside. We contend that you basically almost have to drive into the site to see that there's no parapet wall and you can see the roof. One of the other main reasons for having a parapet wall is to hide equipment that may be mounted on the roof. And there is no equipment to be mounted on the roof, so you don't have to have a parapet wall to hide air conditioning units or air handlers or some other things that might be on the roof. These are RVs that we stored. There may be light electrical there, but there's no air conditioning or heating. These are open units, so we see no need for a parapet wall on the inside. That you basically have to gain entrance into the site. You become, instead of a public, you become a customer when you enter inside that site, and you'll see that it probably never be noticed that there's no parapet wall there. So our basic contention is it's not needed. We don't need to hide anything, and that it will only be seen by customers that come into the site. Now, yes, you can drive down. If you're driving down Highway 51, you could probably glance in and see maybe a unit wheel on the west side. You might be able to glance, but we just don't see a need for it. It presents problems with the drainage coming down there, but our contention is just let the rainwater hit the roof and run off the edge of the roof into the concrete parking lot. This will be concrete parking lot, so.
It slopes to the back, not the front though, right?
Back to front.
Okay,
Into-
back to
into
front,
the
so it's
facility,
sloping
yeah.
down.
It's sloping to the inside.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
So all the outer buildings are RV storage,
all the outer building are RV storage.
so there's no
And they're all
front, there's no
masonry.
front wall.
They're all masonry with a parapet that's gonna be high enough, it's gonna be above the roof line if you're driving down 51.
Around the three sides,
And on three sides.
right, and then the open side, there's no wall because they're all open,
They're all open.
and all RV, okay.
They're all open.
What's the height of the parapet?
Then the eave of the building on the backside is 16 feet, and the parapet will go probably 2 feet above that.
2 feet?
Yeah, on three sides.
And that's the main building too?
The main building too should be 14 on the eave, and it goes 16 to 17 on the,
Okay.
it's gonna be stepped up and down, they have to break it up down the sides.
Was there a parapet wall on the initial conditional use presented to the board? When this was initially
No discussion. I don't, I
What
was
are the
here, I
plans?
did it, and there was no discussion about parapet walls.
Are these the same plans you presented though?
These are the same, basically the same ones we presented to them, but, except we had them real big, but we had them, this is small.
My
so.
question is, did they have a parapet wall on there at that time?
No, I mean, it's the same design.
The ones that we originally showed, Jim, tonight, we got a conditional use, were those buildings did they have parapet walls?
And we always intended them to have parapet walls, whether or not they were on the rendering or not, I don't know.
Okay. But there was no discussion whatsoever about the parapet walls, so. These units are, by the way, are all masonry. I mean, they're all masonry, all four except for the RV storage. They're
So the
all
question
brick.
is, the main building has parapet wall around all four sides.
Correct,
All of the RV storage buildings has parapet walls on three sides.
correct.
So the question is whether or not put a parapet wall on the opening side of the RV.
Right, it's 14 feet high, it's, you know, how do you get the water off, build brick above it, I mean, you know, it runs into a lot of different issues.
These units are 12, 14 foot wide, so you got to put some kind of superstructure
All right.
to hold that brick, 2 foot of brick above you, so it just presents a problem. And we don't see the necessity for it. You basically almost have to go drive in the site to see it, and,
One thing I would mention, you know, just in case anyone should wonder, as Ben mentioned, the mini storage building has a parapet on all four sides of the building. That's why when you get to the point of a motion, whether it's to approve or deny, you'll see in the motion that it talks about starting with building B, C, D, E, F. There is no building A listed. That's because that's the mini storage building, which is going to have a parapet on all four sides, so it's not part of the variance.
Is there any other covered RV storage? They're not in Hernando, it's all open storage, right?
Just to make a point, the last three developments that I've seen on 51 near that property have parapet walls on three sides. The Wolf Crossing, the gas station, and the barber shop. They're parapeted on three sides with the roof falling off the back and no parapet.
I'm stuck on barber shop. I'm trying to think where that's at.
Where the new gas station is, and then there's a barber shop and a real roof.
Oh, right, yeah, yeah.
Right there, right here.
Oak Grove
I
and
know, I
51.
know where you're at now.
Yeah.
I don't think we have anything to compare the exact likeness to.
That's what I was
Hernando.
asking. We don't have any covered RV storage. in
Correct.
Hernando. I don't even think in the county. do we?
Yes.
Yeah, Olive Branch has.
Olive Branch does?
Yeah, there's some in South Haven, yes.
I may also make one other point, and Ben made this the last point,
And I'm sorry, if we can get you
sign
to, we'll just announce your name and
I'm Jim
address.
Burrow.
Thank you.
by Hay, Mississippi. On the last one, I lost my train of thought there. The parapet, what am I trying to say? On that, we had those three on Highway 51, and, the 17 zonings that were on this existing property. One was a salvage yard and open parking and covered parking. And so that was approved on this site prior to our special exemption. So, I mean, there was going to be covered parking and then parking that you could see when you're driving by. We think we've cleaned it up quite a bit.
I think the point Jim was trying to make is when we asked for the conditional use, this property is on C2, which is highway commercial. And I think this previous board and the city is to be commended for approving a mini storage on this site. Because you could do bus terminal, you could do, this is C2, flea markets, hotels, you could do shooting galleries, you can do a lumber yard, you could do manufactured home sales, motor vehicle sales, including salvage vehicles, plumbing shop. I mean, you go down this list of things that could be approved for this site, and we're going to put a beautiful, I said beautiful, clean-looking, you see what Mr. Burrow has done on McInville. He's going to do the same here. It's all masonry, and we're asking just not to put a parapet wall on the side, on the inside, it can't be seen. We think cannot be easily seen, so, and I think that's reasonable.
Commissioners, I'd like to also state that being there is no other likenesses with this specific project, that whatever the decision is today, we do set a precedence for future construction of these places, so it should be. So keep that in the back of your minds as well. as far as the precedents being set, one way or the other. Any other questions or comments from Mr. Smith?
I have a question, probably, I guess for BJ. The only reason why this is in front of us is because the parapet is in the front of the building, although the exterior is what's going to be seen from the outside. If it was reversed, we wouldn't be talking about this?
No. The reason it's before you is because the ordinance specifically requires that where you have a parapet wall design, it has to be on all four sides of the building. Whether it's on the front side, the rear,
Okay.
it has to have all four sides of the building, okay?
So the precedent has already been set for other buildings for it to be in the back, like Entergy and
Well,
the other buildings.
you know, I don't like to disagree with the chairman,
You can disagree with me, I'm good with it.
but, yeah, I've said this before and I'll probably say it again. Each application for a variance must stand on its own basis, okay? Just as an example, the Entergy building where the board approved the variance to eliminate a parapet on a portion of the rear of that building has nothing in common with this at all. I mean, in terms of the type of building, the type of use, the design of the building, the materials involved, the colors involved, there is nothing comparable between the two, okay? So the approval of that variance does not set a precedent for anybody, okay? Because each variance that you approve or deny has to be based on the evidence that you're looking at relative to this specific application, okay? And whether they have made the case or not made the case for what they want to do. It should not be controlled by anything that you may have done in the past. And that's true of any application, not just this one. So,
That doesn't mean it doesn't get used though, because it comes up. It's just like,
oh, yeah,
just
I
like
mean,
we
you
mentioned
know, people can
the
make that argument, you know.
barber shop or
Oh, yeah.
gas station. I mean, it happens.
Yeah, I don't know
It
how
gets
many,
addressed.
you know, I don't know how many convenience stores, just since I've been here, how many convenience stores I've had to argue with about wanting to not have the parapet on the rear of the building and just sheet flowing storm water off the back of their building. Well, you know, I'm sorry. The ordinance says it's gotta be on all four sides. You know?
Mr. Smith, let me ask you this.
Sure.
Is there a reason it can't be sloped to the back and the parapet put on the front? I mean, I guess that would apply to maybe I know one side of this faces a park, correct? Faces the Renaissance Park, correct?
Well, really, what is the front of the building? I'm talking about the RV storage. What really is the front of the building? I contend the front of the building is what faces Highway 51 and what faces the park. And the rear of the building, although it's sloped the wrong way, but the rear of the building is really the one that shows the front end or back end of RVs parked in them, so.
And that's what I'm talking about.
He's in reference to the RV storage.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is RV storage only.
I'm talking about the
Correct.
entrance, I guess, to the RV store. Because essentially what you're doing is, it's sloped towards the entrance.
That's correct.
Where the RVs pull in.
Correct.
Can it not be reversed?
Well, we did that on purpose, so you wouldn't see it from the park, and you only see it in the interior of the facility. I mean, there's no problem doing it.
He's
the way
talking
you're
about reversing the roof pitch,
More
right? You're
people
talking
can see
about.
the roof that way, and I thought that's what we were trying to avoid.
Go.
Any other questions or comments? Thank you, Mr. Smith.
Thank you.
Is there anyone here for or against this application? Please come forward, state your name and address. Did you happen to fill out one of our speaker cards as well? If you'll just do that before you leave tonight, please.
Sure. Jason Brady. I'm at 3245 Highway 51 South. I'll be their neighbor. I actually don't have a real strong opinion on this particular part, I will be on the back end of that. And so I actually agree with what he was saying, is I would rather it be facing toward the interior part of the RV storage facility, being a neighbor where I'm going to see the parapet wall versus their roof. So I think the decision should be either all four or going inward toward the facility itself.
Thank you. Is there anyone else here for or against this application? Do I have a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve a design review variance to allow the elimination of a roof parapet wall along the front elevations of proposed buildings B, C, D, E, and F, as identified on the submitted site plan for Hernando's self-two storage to be located at 3331 US Highway 51 South, a 5.7 acre tract on the northwest corner of US Highway 51, and the entrance road to the Renaissance Park in Section 24, Township 23 South, Range 8 West, based upon findings A through D.
Second.
Key second.
Commissioner Clark,
Aye.
Commissioner Thorn,
Aye.
Commissioner Jordan,
Nay.
Commissioner Brumbelow,
Aye.
Commissioner Hawkins,
Aye.
Commissioner Ashworth,
Aye.
Commissioner Skeen.
Aye.
Motion passes. All right, Mr. Page, item number 4, request for a zoning ordinance buffer yard variance to allow construction of a new self-storage facility, providing a 10-foot wide buffer yard along the west property line adjoining the city's Renaissance Park, rather than the required 30-foot wide buffer yard for a variance of 20 feet, and an approval of an alternative landscape plan on the property identified at 3331 US Highway 51 South.
Okay, excuse me. Essentially, this is a fairly simple variance request. In the zoning ordinance, we have a table that establishes buffer yards between various zoning district types. In this particular case, the buffer yard requirement between C4, which is the zoning of the subject property itself, and R10, which is the zoning of the park and of the property to the north of this site, requires a type 30 transitional buffer yard, which shall consist of a strip of landscaped area, a minimum of 30 feet wide, landscaped as follows: an opaque barrier shall be installed within the buffer yard in accordance with the requirements of paragraph 8A2A of this section, to a minimum height of 6 feet, plus one medium evergreen tree, ultimate height 20 to 40 feet, for every 15 feet planted on a triangular staggered spacing, plus one large deciduous tree, ultimate height 50 plus feet, for every 60 linear feet of measured along the opaque barrier. The landscape material shall be planted on the side of the opaque barrier which abuts the less intense zoning district for development. Basically, the variance involves two parts. First, of course, there is the issue of the width of the buffer yard. The applicant is meeting the 30-foot width on the north end of the property, largely because there are two 20-foot wide sewer easements that run along that northern property line, so you really can't build anything, over those. On the western boundary line adjoining the park, the applicant is proposing a 10-foot wide buffer yard instead of the 30-foot wide buffer yard. Which would involve a variance of 20 feet. Now, additionally, one of the things that, the type 30 buffer yard requires an opaque barrier and also requires landscaping based upon the provision of an evergreen tree for every 15 lineal feet of buffer yard, as well as a large deciduous tree for every 60 lineal feet of buffer yard. Now, in your staff report, you have a landscape plan that was submitted by the applicant. And the landscape plan, of course, does not reflect these provisions. Now, first off, let me mention the opaque barrier. What the ordinance says is that the opaque barrier shall be either a masonry wall or an earthen berm, which would be 6 feet tall as well, okay? What the applicant is proposing, and I'm okay with, basically, is that the wall of the perimeter buildings, as I mentioned earlier tonight, have no penetration. There are no doors, there are no windows. It's just a long blank wall, and they're essentially contending that that represents the opaque barrier, that is like a masonry wall. And of course, we have the parapet that we just discussed, on that side of the building as well, so it's going to be like about 16 feet tall. So I feel like they're in compliance with that. They're going to connect the various perimeter buildings with a brick wall, 6-foot brick wall, to make that opaque barrier continuous, throughout the development. As far as the landscaping goes, that's another matter. Essentially, the landscaping on that western side reflects a combination of hollies and crepe myrtles. As such, the hollies would classify as a evergreen, and would potentially grow, to 20 feet tall. So that would be considered to be in conformance. However, the one large deciduous tree every 60 lineal feet is supposed to be, 50-plus feet tall at maturity. Crepe myrtle is never going to get that tall. So that would not qualify, that provision. Basically, in evaluating that western property line, as I mentioned, it reflects 33 evergreen trees, which is basically a deficiency of 8. We need an additional 8 trees to conform. And then, of course, it has no large deciduous trees, which is a deficiency of 10. Now, we've also got, basically the same deficiencies along the northern property line, where you just have hollies, you don't even have crepe myrtles. So, you've got, I think it's 9 large deciduous trees and 8 evergreen trees would need to be added. So basically, as I said, the variance deals with 2 things, the width of the buffer yard and the landscaping. of the buffer yard, okay? Now, the most important thing to understand or remember, up to now, we have been dealing with, we've had both a zoning variance in the parking and a design review variance in the parapet wall issue. The buffer yard matter is another zoning variance. And in the zoning variance, that's based on hardship, a necessary hardship, and that is being imposed on the applicant by the strict enforcement of the requirements. I have given you the applicant's responses to the 4 criteria that you're to look at relative to a zoning variance. I've also given you the staff comments relating to those 4 criteria. Basically, a couple of things I did want to note. I noted that on some of the plans, it's reflecting the perimeter building on the western boundary as a future building. Basically, if that building is going to serve as the opaque barrier, it can't be a future building. It's got to be there at the outset of the project, because that's the whole purpose behind the buffer yard requirements, is that they are buffering the less intense land use from the more intense land use. So, we can't have, an undefined future date that we don't know when that building will be built. Let's see here. Another minor point is we do need to bring the landscaping plan into conformance with the site plan. As I mentioned, along that northern property line, there are 2 sewer easements. One belongs to the city of Hernando and the other one belongs to DeCrua. And the site plan accurately reflects that building on the western boundary not being encroaching into those utility easements. But the landscape plan still shows it encroaching into that DeCrua easement, so that needs to be corrected. As I have mentioned several times tonight, I've given you a motion to approve with suitable findings, a motion to deny with suitable findings, and then, of course, you can table the item if you feel like you need additional time to consider the item or additional information that needs to be accumulated. So with that, that's my report, unless anyone has any questions.
Any questions or comments for Mr. Page?
Mr. Page, just one question. You referenced the landscaping. That's a different discussion than this one. Or is that part of the same thing?
It's all together. It's, the buffer yard and the landscaping in the buffer yard are all part of the same regulation.
All right.
I would hasten to note, though, that doesn't mean that you have to treat them as a unified motion. I mean, you can address them separately if you wish.
Okay.
I'm gonna have to excuse myself for a second.
We should tell him. Mr. Carter is the chairman.
You're good, Shay. So, Mr. Page, I'm going to ask just to be clear again on the north side of this property. Because of the sewer easement, that building can be used as part of the opaque, am I understanding right, the opaque barrier?
Yes.
So that amount of landscaping that's on that side is efficient enough, what is being listed here, correct?
Essentially, let me, and I want to give you the correct numbers here, okay? Essentially, along the northern boundary, the currently submitted landscape plan only reflects 33 evergreen trees, a deficiency of 8, and currently no large deciduous trees, okay? Which the lineal feet would require 10, okay? Along the western boundary, you have the 27 evergreen trees, a deficiency of 8. And again, the crepe myrtles would not qualify as large deciduous trees. So that particular boundary would require 9.
I'm only seeing on the north side, if I'm looking at this schematic right, this plat, one hollow oak. Is that our one large, when we, or willow oak, sorry, I apologize. But we're needing 10. Are we going to be using some of the current landscaping? That's not to be included with that, correct?
Well,
The natural buffer that's currently already there, is that going to be in conjunction with that, or they have to put in on top of that?
essentially, the way the ordinance is structured, they would have to provide that in addition to what's there. Now, obviously, that's something that you can take into consideration, as part of your deliberation. I would think the main thing you would want to be sure of, though, the landscape plan, although it shows, existing woods, if you will, along that northern property line, we just have to be sure, if it's an important part of your consideration, that those trees are actually on his property. Because if they're not on his property, and somebody comes along and cuts them down, because they're on their property, then they might not be there anymore.
Well, my concern would be with the easement from the crew and the city of Hernando, if they come to clear that, to
Right.
maintenance that. And we've got neighbors to the north that are looking at the mini storage instead of having the proper buffering.
I believe, and Mr. Smith probably can address this better than I can, but I believe those easements are already cleared. I don't think there are any trees in those easement areas.
It shows some trees towards the very north end of the
Right.
drawing.
Right.
Yeah, I went by there today. There's a big established deciduous tree wall there.
But again, that's defining whether or not that tree or that natural buffer that is currently there is on their property or not.
The one that's currently there, I don't think it is. I think it's up the hill.
You get the home.
Oh, it's yours.
There are a couple, I think there's one or two trees that are still on the other side of the fence, right next to the fence. But, yeah, all the rest of the trees are on our property.
So in lieu of that, the 10 need to be, I would think, need to be put in there, being that doesn't fall on property lines, should that be shown there, because again, I don't see them drawn into this.
Right.
And that's all I was wanting to make sure of because of situations. Should something get cleared in the future, then that separation's not there.
Now, one of the things, since we're talking about this northern property line, one of the factors that comes into play here, are those two easement areas. And if you look at the proximity of the easements to the buildings, there's not really a lot of room between the building wall and where those easements begin. I think they're fine as far as the hollies that are being proposed, but I'm not sure you could really get any big trees in there. Because we're only talking a few feet there. Maybe a couple. You can kind of tell, if you compare the western boundary line, that's 10 feet between that building and the property line. So if you consider that width and compare it to the distance between the wall of the building on the north and where the easement starts, it's clearly not even 10 feet, it's at best just, 2 or 3 feet.
And that's actually where the drainage goes. That 2 or 3 feet.
Any other questions or comments? Mr. Ben, I don't think we need to ask you where you live anymore.
Ben
but-
Smith, 2700 Stonebrook, Nisbet. And first of all, what we note on there as being a temporary building on the west side will be built along with the other buildings in the project. So to answer that question, that's not a building in the future. It will be built with the rest of the buildings that are there. One thing that's occurred between submission of the site plan that you've seen right now and the latest set of plans that was submitted to the city and to the city engineer is that we finally located exactly where the decrual easement is located now. There was a lot of problems trying to find out where it was at and where it was in the right place or not. But anyway, we settled that problem. I first considered putting a retaining wall, making that rear of that northern building a retaining wall, but I have moved the buildings forward towards Renaissance Park Drive. Instead of 10 feet behind that building, we've got something like 20 feet or more behind that northernmost building to the easement. So that area, that landscaping can be put in now, it's been increased probably to about 20 feet. The latest grading and drainage plan shows that. And the site plan also shows that. We have moved everything to give some separation between that wall of the north building and the sewer easement of decrual. We also found out that between the city's easement and the decrual easement, there were some places as much as 13 feet between the two. It went from 7 feet to 13 feet, so there's also an opportunity there to put landscaping in between the two easements and not have it on the easements themselves. So I think we can work out the width of the landscape easement. We also can work out the problem with the right material to put in those easements. We fully intend to meet the ordinance requirement as to type and height of the material that's in those easements. If I could, if you could go to, just to make a point, if you could go to this drawing here. This is your zoning map. And I've circled there that your current zoning map shows, I showed the lot, I've highlighted it in black, and I also showed that whole park area And our lot and the lot across the street is all Zone C4. I was told by Mr. Page, BJ, that the park area has been rezoned to R10. The second sheet, the next sheet down, this is the certification that's down at the bottom of your zoning map. And it shows that the last recorded change made to the zoning map, which we know it was not the last one, was in 2018, October of 2018. If you look further down at the very bottom there, beneath the seal of the city of Hernando, you'll see that this map was printed in February 19, 2019. So as of that date, that property was on C4. It could have been changed to R10. I don't know when it was changed. We went by what BJ had told us. He had been told it was zoned to R10. As you know, we have to show that it's something's occurred that's it's been a handicap to us. I'd like to show you what happened if the city rezoned that property to R10. What happened to this piece of property? Here is your buffer yard table. Comes out of your zoning ordinance. If you go to the C2 on the left-hand side, and you go straight across, and you see R10, the vertical column, which I've highlighted for you, there's a 30-foot requirement. If that property, in fact, is still zoned C4 or C2, you go back across, and the requirement is 10 feet. This property that we're talking about has been C4, I think, for 10 or 15 years. So when the city rezoned their parkland R10, it put a handicap on this particular piece of property because now instead of 10-foot buffer, it requires a 30-foot buffer because the city changed the zoning of the park. Nothing that we did, or nothing that Mr. Burr did, or Todd Ferguson, who owned the property, Bright Investments, which owned the property. So this requirement of 30 feet was caused by an action of the city. This would be similar to a liquor store being built, and then you can have a church within 200 feet of it, and a church moves next door, and you close the liquor store down. That liquor store was there first. We were there first. So this requirement of 30 feet, we believe, was caused by the action of the city. So we show a 10-foot. I hope we all can agree that the required is going to be 10 foot there. Also, the other drawing I showed on here makes a little bit of a difference. Is this drawing here, which you'll see if you look at this drawing. We show the 10-foot buffer. Also, we showed that there's a 5-foot, so that future building is going to be roughly 15 feet off that line, not 10. It's going to be roughly 15 feet off the property line, and it will be all landscaped. That wall all along that building will be 16 foot tall, which includes a 2-foot parapet. And also, if you look, notice that the fence that for the park is not on the property line. And from the fence to our buffer is roughly 25 feet. So you're going to have 25 feet from the fence. Add the 5 feet to the building, you'll have close to 30 feet from the back fence to this building of green space. At the front, you'll have 19 feet of landscape between the fence and the corner of the building. So we fully intend to meet the requirements. Whatever the plants we need to have, we will have the trees, the spacing, the sizing. We will meet your requirements. But we request that be granted 10-foot buffer instead of the required 30 feet.
Can I make one correction?
Sure.
Told Ben, when I was talking to Mr. BJ today, he told me about the western building and how it couldn't be a future building because we had an opaque wall there. So we agreed to not do the east building right now for money constraints, and do the western covered parking, and then put a metal wrought iron, black wrought iron fence down Highway 51, which is okay, facing the street. So we wouldn't have that, all buildings in right now.
But the building on the west is not a future building?
It will be a real building, so you can get the opaque in between there and the park. And then we do a black wrought iron fence and landscape down the highway side.
That's what's on the park side, right? That's the park, that's what faces the park.
Yes, yes.
The the covered park.
That will be built.
Yes.
It sounds like we got two separate buffers to think about here. One's the west side, that includes the building with the narrow, up against the park. And then we've got what you were talking about, the findings that you have found, where you solved the problem of finding the actual easement, the actual where.
Correct.
And then there's a 13-foot wedge or something there between the two, between the city.
Yeah, the decrual is what you say, well, how come you couldn't find it? It's a force main. It's buried. There's no manholes like the city sewer line. It's two manholes, and it's easy to draw a line between the two manholes and locate their force main. And after we did that, their construction drawing showed that the city's easement and the decrual's easement touched each other. When in reality, on the ground, they're as much as 13 feet apart.
And you had mentioned or suggested that you put landscaping between.
Yeah, I'm saying that 7 to 13 feet can be used for landscaping.
Would then, but that, you wouldn't own that property, you wouldn't own that landscape, who would maintain it, I guess? We just plant some trees there?
Mr. Burrow would maintain between the two easements.
But
He'll maintain the easement, they're not.
Yeah, Mr. Page.
It's on your property, right?
Yeah, it's on our, it's gonna be fenced, they're gonna take care of the.
Mr. Page had a
Mr. Burrow
comment
will
too.
take care of the both easements, they'll be done by.
Essentially, an easement is just a right of use. In other words, Mr. Burrow still owns the property that the easement is on. It just limits what he can use it for, okay? So he still has the legal responsibility to cut the grass and, maintain that area. Now, what Ben has said is that, what their investigation has determined is that there's an area of about 13 feet between the two easements that could be used for landscaping, okay? So that area is not in the easement, It still belongs to Mr. Burrow. He's still responsible for maintaining it, and it would still be his landscaping because it's not part of the easements, okay? And I think in order to maybe simplify this a little bit, basically what Mr. Smith has said in his presentation, and Ben, you can call me a liar if I say it the wrong way, but he has said that they will comply with the ordinance requirements as to the number and type of plant materials. So that part of the variance, we don't even have to fool with, okay? Because he said that they're gonna do that, So if we don't include that in our motion, then they just gotta do what the ordinance says, okay? So really, the only thing that's in front of the board at this point, if you so desire, is the width of the 10-foot buffer yard.
And I just have a clarification comment. Prior to Mr. Burrow buying this property as an RV storage, there was another applicant that this got approved on, if my memory serves me right. So he bought that as is, and at that point, it was already C4. So when he bought that, it went to him as C4. It wasn't something that the city undermined you during your ownership, if I'm correct.
Well, I think what Ben is saying is that, at the point where Renaissance Bank owned the property, it was, all of the property, including the park land, was zone C4 at that time. And that, and all I can tell you is based on the zoning map that I have and that I used, it shows the park property as being R10, okay? And so what Ben is saying is that, when they bought the property and it was zoned, and the Renaissance Park property was still zone C4, they only had a 10-foot buffer yard requirement. And when the city came and rezoned it to R10, that then created a new requirement for them that they hadn't counted on.
I think it's
Jay,
backwards.
I think the property was R10 prior to us taking ownership of the parkland.
Oh, okay.
And Renaissance, when they took the ownership and donated the land, the city turned it into C4 at that time, if I'm correct. Before, it was R10 prior.
It was R10.
That's what
We
I'm
didn't
saying.
turn the parkland into C4. C4, I think there's an error on that zoning map. Because the city did not rezone it to C4 once we received, if I'm not mistaken on that.
But essentially what you're saying, Kristen, is that
Yeah, the
property-
bank, the bank,
park
the
property is
Renaissance
zoned
Bank.
R10.
Yeah, the Renaissance Bank got all that property was on C4.
Yes.
Renaissance Bank did. My research showed that they asked for and got C4 for the
When the
parkland.
property was owned by, did the bank rezone it to C4? Do you remember?
Maybe, I was before my time, so.
Yeah. The rezoning, Renaissance Bank was the one that requested the rezoning to C4.
On the
C2, I'm
certification
sorry,
page, I don't
C2.
see anywhere it mentions C4. The certification page that you provided, I mean, it's not mentioned C4 anywhere on there. Unless am I misreading it? I saw the C2 that you mentioned,
Yeah, C2.
but it's not C4.
You're talking about the
anywhere.
chart, the zoning chart, the buffer yard chart? This
No,
one?
he's talking about the
The
certification.
official
of
zone
zoning.
map,
Certification.
certification.
Well, the point I was trying to make there is that if you go online and research, I know he's got access to things that we don't have, but I'm just saying your map, as of February the 19th, 2019, which is 2.5 years ago, as of 2.5 years ago, that property was still shown to be C4 on the map. And it's still shown as C4 today. But you don't, every time there's a zoning change, they don't go in and physically change the color on that map. They do it, they may do it one day, but they don't change it. But they do keep a running tab, but for some apparent reason, they stopped doing it on 10/16 of 2018.
I think if that western boundary is facing the park, it's of utmost importance that we provide the most buffer zone we possibly can to that. I think we owe that to the park.
Well,
I realize that there was apparently an error made somewhere along the way, but that, it's not a commercial district, it's a park.
Any other questions or comments for Mr. Smith?
Just, it's an odd question, curiosity. Building C and D in the north side, why is it cocked up like that? Why would it not square it off?
It paralleled the easements,
Oh, okay.
not the property line, it paralleled the easements.
Okay.
That's why they were done that way.
Just curious.
Any other questions or comments for Mr. Smith? Thank you, Mr. Smith.
Thank you.
Is there anyone here for or against this application? If so, please come forward. State your name and address.
I'm against it. My name is Jarrett Mashaw, I live at 13 Connors Court South. We frequent that park all the time, and I agree with Commissioner Jordan that you owe it to the park for the 30-foot buffer. That's pretty much all I got to say.
Thank you.
Well, one other thing. Y'all use other cities as examples for ordinances. I moved to Hernando for a reason, for those ordinances. So I'd appreciate you keeping that in mind. I'm sure other citizens did too.
Thank you. Anyone else here for or against this application?
Jason Brady, 3245 Highway 51 South. I agree with what the other gentleman said, and I think it's important when we're talking as a planning commission and as a citizens, is we want to ensure that variance requests are not contrary to the public interest. And as he mentioned, I think for the park itself, I think we need to have what the ordinances require for the park side, as well as the northern boundary, though I recognize that that's not particularly in this application, but whatever the requirements are, I hope that they're strictly enforced for the betterment of the community. I do want these guys to have a successful business. I'm not against them having a successful business, but I don't think an undue hardship is placed upon these individuals here. I'm hoping that when they had the property that they did the business plan accordingly to what the requirements were at the time. When it was submitted is a big question, regardless of when the property was purchased. When were the plans submitted? I think that's a very important part of it. If it was already zoned residential and then the plans were submitted, then I think it's very important that those be followed strictly.
Anyone else here for or against this application? Do I have a motion?
Motion, want to make a motion to deny the zoning variance for Jim Borough of Hernando Self-Storage to owner of the property to allow construction of a new self-storage facility providing a 10-foot wide buffer yard along the western property line of the subject site, rather than require 30-foot wide buffer yard, a variance of 20 feet, an alternative landscape plan. The subject property is identified as 3331 US Highway 51, South Parcel 3086-240.00013.02, a 5.70 acre tract located on the northwest corner of US Highway 51 and the entrance road to the city's Renaissance Park in Section 24, Township 3, South, Range 8, West, based upon the following findings, A through D.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Commissioner Clark,
Aye.
Commissioner Thorne,
Aye.
Commissioner Jordan,
Aye.
Commissioner Brumbault,
Aye.
Commissioner Hawkins,
Aye.
Commissioner Ashworth,
Aye.
Commissioner Skeen.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, sir.
if I may, just to be sure that everyone is aware, since you know what's going on, any person that's aggrieved of the action of the board, planning commission rather, I'm sorry, excuse me, has the right to appeal this decision to the Board of Aldermen. They have to submit an appeal in writing to the planning commission office within the next 10 days, 10 calendar days. So, if you have an interest in this application, you may want to check with the planning commission office when that 10-day period is up to see whether or not an appeal has been filed. Because if it has been, then you'll want to attend the Board of Aldermen meeting, for that purpose. So, that's all I wanted to say.
Thank you.
10 days from now?
Yeah.
Can I state one
And
thing,
if,
just for the benefit of the commission? As neighbors of this place, we did not receive any notice regarding this meeting. I found out through Facebook.
And, or any of the meetings that take place except for the last one where they approved, the plan. That's the only one we received it from, so we would, yeah, we would love to receive notices.
there were notices that were mailed out. I'd have to look at the addresses that are listed to see.
Thank you, yeah, if you still, I mean, we're literally the one that butts up against them, so we would love any.
Are you on the, did you sign in with your?
Yes.
Okay, I'll check it and make sure.
Ms. Rochelle, did you fill out a card too? Just do it prior to you leaving, and you can give it to Ms. Kristen if y'all don't mind, please.
And if you do call the planning office and no one is, you don't receive an answer, just leave a message and we'll give you a call back because the office is very short-staffed.
Thank y'all. All right, Mr. Page, item number 5, a request for final plat approval of the 4th revision of Lot 8 of Juanita Acres. located on the east side of Hall Road, south of Pleasant Hill Road, more specifically known as 1246 Hall Road in Section 30, Township 2, South Range 7 West. Revising the plat to vacate a 25-foot wide right-of-way along the southern boundary line of the lot, previously vacated by the Board of Aldermen.
No, they don't have anything to, they don't have a card to.
Sorry.
There's not any,
A speaker.
that's okay. Don't worry about it. I've got your names and addresses.
Thank y'all. Previously vacated by the Board of Aldermen on March 5th, 2019. Property consists of 3.32 acres and is currently zoned in the AR Agricultural Residential District.
Okay, this is very simple.
You said that already.
By golly, this one will be very simple. You know, back in 2019, the board, you know, by board order, you know, vacated this 25-foot right-of-way, okay? And I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about why or how, but basically, by board order, this road no longer exists. The applicant is requesting to revise Lot 8 to bring it into conformance with the action the board has already taken. Okay? And I have to assume that that's for title purposes. You know, so that when they go and do title searches, that they won't be confused and see an old plat that has the old right-of-way on it. As far as any kind of conditions of approval goes, there are no, you know, like roads being constructed or improvements being constructed or things being dedicated or whatever. So in terms of our standard conditions, there really aren't any. But I did notice a couple of things that need to be addressed relative to the plat. The plat currently reads that, you know, this is the fourth revision of Juanita Acres. Well, it's a fourth revision of Lot 8 of Juanita Acres subdivision. And, you know, part of our job as the Planning Commission is to try and keep the land records straight. You know, this really isn't the fourth revision to Lot 8. In going back and researching the approvals relative to this plat, there have been 4 revisions to the overall Juanita Acres subdivision, okay? There have been, as far as I can tell, no revisions to Lot 8, okay? So I think the title of the plat really needs to be revised to something along the lines of, you know, the first revision to Lot 8 of the fourth revision of Juanita. You know what I'm saying, Ben? I mean, you know, it's just one of those crazy things, because, you know, somebody would come through and read that plat title and they would think that there were previous revisions to Lot 8 and they wouldn't be able to find them. But anyway, other than that, we just need to revise the utility easements along the front and south property lines to reflect the new south property line. And we need to reflect the section corner tie-in, and that's it. That's my report, unless anyone has any questions.
Any questions or comments? Will the applicant please come forward?
No, I don't have anything. It's just that the state law says that when you abandon the street, half of it goes to the property owner on one side, the other half goes to the property owner on the other side. So this little 25-foot strip is reverting to the owner of Lot 8. And we still 2 different tax parcels. We're making 1 tax parcel.
Any questions or comments for Mr. Smith? Thank you,
you.
Mr. Smith. Anyone here for or against this application? Do I have a motion?
I'll make a motion to grant final plat approval for the first revision to Lot 8 and fourth revision. Juanita Acres subdivision, 3.23 acres located on the east side of Hall Road, south of Pleasant Hill Road, and is more specifically known as 1246 Hall Road in Section 30, Township 2 South, Range 7 West, based upon a finding that the submitted plat generally conforms to the requirements of the city's codes and ordinances, subject to the following conditions. Revise the plat as set forth in 1, 2, and 3.
Second.
Second?
Commissioner Clark?
Aye.
Commissioner Thorne?
Aye.
Commissioner Jordan?
Aye.
Commissioner Burbalow?
Aye.
Commissioner Hawkins?
Aye.
Commissioner Ashworth?
Aye.
Commissioner Skeens?
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you.
Mr. Smith, go home and get you something to eat. Go home and get you something to eat now. All right, Mr. Page. Item number 6, request for a final plat approval for Montclair Subdivision, Phase 6, 28.67 acres, 36 family residential lots, and 1 common open space lot located south of West Oak Grove Road, east of Tate's Way, and at the eastern terminus of Clare Circle South in Section 23, Township 3 South, Range 8 West. Property is currently zoned AR, Agricultural Residential District.
No, I must have got that wrong.
Did I skip? That's what I got, don't you?
Maybe I didn't get it typed up right.
Isn't that what I got here?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's not right, I'm sorry. It's R12 overlay? PUD, okay. Sorry. No, it was my typo, I'm sure. Okay. As we just got through mentioning, it's a planned unit development. In this particular phase, we're talking about 36 single-family residential lots, 1 common open space. The residential lot sizes range from 14,704 square feet up to 58,465 square feet, with the majority of the lots in the 15,000 to 21,000 square foot range. Common open space consists of 5.65 acres. Access to Phase 6 will be provided by the extension of Clare Circle South from its current terminus on further to the east. There are no interconnecting streets in this phase of the development, although the development's approved preliminary plan does call for a north-south interconnecting street located just east of both Phase 6 and the adjacent Phase 5 that will ultimately connect Clare Circle South with Creek Haven Drive. The preliminary plan did call for another interconnecting street between Phases 5 and 6 that would have been part of this phase, but it was not provided for in the previously approved Phase 5, so it cannot now be carried through to Phase 6. All the lots in Phase 6 will have 50-foot wide right-of-ways. In terms of the setbacks, one of the things I did find relative to the approved preliminary plan is that lots 225 through 242 and 248 through 260 will have a 30-foot front yard, a 10-foot side, and a 30-foot rear, while lots 243 through 247 have a 40-foot front yard setback, 15-foot side, and 35-foot rear. Addition to that, I would note that in the restrictive covenants and the preliminary plan, it states that lots 30,000 square feet in size or larger have to have a 2,200 square foot minimum heated floor area. Lots 20,000 square feet to 30,000 square feet have to have a 2,000 square foot minimum heated floor area. And lots 10,000 square feet to 20,000 square feet would have 1,800 square foot minimum heated floor area. Basically, at this point in time, we don't have a copy of the restricted covenants. However, I did find in my research that the covenants that were recorded with Phase 1 were also attached to Phases 2 through 5 through the recording of a declaration of joinder, which basically just says that this phase is going to have the same covenants as Phase 1. I'm anticipating that the developer is probably going to take the same approach.
Yes, we will have the same restricted covenants as Phase in the previous phase.
Okay. Basically, the final plat that's been submitted meets the City of Hernando subdivision regulations, and the lots meet the requirements of the approved Montclair project text and preliminary development plan. I did note that driving through the development, it appears that all of the public improvements are in place with the exception of the asphalt on the streets at this point in time. And Phase 6 does not, of course, complete the development of this subdivision. However, a recent review of county ownership records indicates that none of the common open space areas required by the original PUD approval and recorded with all of the previous phases have been transferred to the Montclair Homeowners Association at this time, even though the association has been in existence since August of 2006 and is still considered in good standing by the Mississippi Secretary of State's office. Basically, I have proposed a motion of approval in terms of the plat itself. We need to revise the owners and mortgagee certificates to use our current wording relative to the dedication of rights-of-way and easements. We need to revise note number 1 on the face of the plat to reflect the correct setback requirements for lots 243 through 247. We need to revise the plat to reflect the correct front yard building line for lots 243 through 247. We need to revise the plat to reflect the section corner tie-in, revise the title of the plat to incorporate the number of lots and the zoning district identification, and revise the plat to eliminate the city certification located in the upper left-hand corner of the sheet, number 1, since it is a duplication of the same certificate located on the right-hand side of sheet number 1. And basically got 2 of them. Then from that point on, it's our standard subdivision conditions. And that's my report unless anyone has any questions.
Any questions or comments for Mr. Page? Thank you, Mr. Page. The applicant, please come forward.
Name is Greg Smith, Mendrop Engineering, 2595 Country Club Road, Senatobia. And I have nothing further to add other than we concur with all of Mr. Page's comments, and we'll get all those corrections he mentioned. So, and answer any questions you might have about it.
Any questions or comments for Mr. Smith?
Just one question on the homeowners associations. So all of the common areas get transferred to the homeowners association after all the phases are done? How does that work?
Well,
go ahead.
Okay. Essentially, you know, I can't speak to how things were done in the past, okay? But since I've been here, you know, one of the conditions of approval that I include, you know, in these subdivision applications is that they have to transfer the common open space areas to the homeowners association with the recording of the plat, okay? So if you approve this, this plat, then the common open space lot that's included in this plat, they'll have to do a deed transferring that to the homeowners association at the time they take the plat, or the time we take the plat over there and have it recorded, okay? Now, I have also included in this proposed motion a condition that the previously recorded common open space areas be transferred to the homeowners association prior to the issuance of any building permit in this section. Okay? So hopefully we'll get it all straightened out.
Any other questions or comments for Mr. Smith? Thank you, Mr. Smith.
Thank you.
Is there anyone here for or against this application? Do I have a motion?
I'll make a motion to grant final plat approval for Montclair Subdivision Phase 6, consisting of 36 single-family residential lots and one common open space lot located at the eastern terminus of Clare Circle South, situated in Section 23, Township 3 South, Range 8 West, based upon a finding that the submitted final plat generally conforms to the approved preliminary plan for the planned unit development and generally meets the requirements of the city's codes and ordinances, subject to conditions 1 through 13.
Second.
Commissioner Clark?
Aye.
Commissioner Thorne?
Aye.
Commissioner Jordan?
Aye.
Commissioner Brumbelow?
Aye.
Commissioner Hawkins? Commissioner Ashworth?
Aye.
Commissioner Skeen?
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Mr. Page, we've got a proposed amendment to the text of the City of Hernando subdivision regulations, the City of Hernando zoning ordinance, and the City of Hernando design standards ordinance concerning provision of cluster mailboxes.
Come over here and actually be on the live stream now.
Yeah, in case y'all didn't know, we are being live streamed in our meetings from now on, so.
Yeah. So, anyway,
Watch what you do.
Fix your hair, Mr. Ashworth.
Who knows?
okay.
I've been sitting here yawning.
Yeah, I want to see everybody in suits and ties next time. Okay. At the last meeting, we discussed some ideas that y'all had. One was to define the access plan for the cluster mailbox units by the number of mailboxes provided, allowing a pull-off lane with a defined entrance and exit with parallel parking for smaller CBU locations and a regular parking area for larger CBU locations. The second thing that was brought up was where subdivisions were developed in phases to require a separate CBU location for each individual section or phase to keep the locations in relatively close proximity to the homes that they were serving. And then finally, to remove wood as an allowed material to assist in long-term maintenance of the facilities, since the homeowners association or property owners association will be responsible for maintenance of these facilities. Okay? Now, I have given you a copy of the proposed amendment that we've been looking at, and I have put in red where I have made the changes to address these proposals. Now, you can see on page 2 where it's talking about the amendment to the subdivision regulations. I have included a new section that says where a subdivision or other project is developed in sections or phases, a separate CBU location will be provided for each individual section or phase conforming to the requirements of this ordinance as each section or phase is developed. So that addresses the one issue that was brought up. Then under access and parking on that same page, CBU locations providing less than 80 mailbox units may provide a pull-off lane with parallel parking and with a defined entrance and exit from the adjacent public or private street, meeting the requirements of this ordinance. CBU locations providing more than 80 mailbox units shall provide an independent parking lot with 90-degree parking and two-way traffic aisles with a defined entrance exit to the adjacent public or private street conforming to the requirements of this ordinance. Basically, I began to look at it, and, unless we want to go with, a third design option, where, rather than having a defined entrance and exit for a pull-off lane, with a grass strip, basically between the pull-off lane and the street, unless we want to go with a third option where we would eliminate the grass strip and it would just be a widening of the street, you know, I really couldn't see splitting it up more than two ways. So, you know, that's kind of why I had it that way. And then finally, on page 3, you'll note where I have struck wood there on item E of structures. I have, you know, struck out the word wood, but I have included or fibrous cement siding, and in parentheses put hardy board or similar material, so that it's clear what we're talking about there. And that's really the long and the short of the changes, because in terms of the amendments to the zoning ordinance, it just references these provisions of the subdivision regulations. And in the design standards ordinance, the amendment simply repeats the same requirements that are in the subdivision regulations. So those three changes, you know, are kind of the long and short of our discussion at the last meeting, unless I missed something. And I would certainly be open to any comments that you might have.
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
So when a developer submits an initial plat approval, he has to put in a design for the CVU. He's also responsible for building like a structure like this, is that
Right.
correct? And it has to match the surrounding houses. Not always is the developer the builder. So how would the developer know what the builder's gonna build? How would he know how to match the materials?
Well, we haven't confronted this yet here, okay? But one of the requirements of our ordinance, when someone comes in with a totally new subdivision, residential subdivision, is they have to submit what's called a pattern book that establishes what the design of the residences in the subdivision will be, in a general sense.
Okay.
You know, that they're not going to have like specific designs necessarily, okay? But it'll talk about, you know, the things that they want to replicate basically, you know, throughout the development. So that will give direction to how these will be designed.
Okay.
Okay? So far, you know, most of the subdivisions that we have been approving up to this point in time have been like successive phases of a previous development where those issues were already addressed, you know, in terms of a pattern, but we're just, you know, proving the same thing over again. So until,
What if it's a straight zoning? They don't do pattern books for straight zonings.
well, actually, if you look in the ordinance, it requires them.
It's never required
Yeah,
before.
yeah, it does. Surprise!
Learn something new every day.
So these CVU, I drove through Montclair,
Yeah.
Montclair today, back through there.
Yeah.
And I actually looked for those CVU, there's none over there that I could find.
Well, actually, there is.
Yeah, they're over there.
Yeah, it's a pretty big facility, too.
It's right in front of my
way back up
brother-in-law's
there?
house.
Oh,
yeah.
really?
It's my brother-in-law's house. Looks
Well,
like-
I'm just thinking through, you know, just the Phase 6 approval plat we just did, and looking at previously, none of those phases have more than 80 residents. So all of those, so each one of those phases, if I'm understanding how we've got this written here, all 6 of those phases would have their own CVU, and because they're less than 80, they would just have pull-off parallel parking. So after the fact, how are we going to handle development like this, where the previous phases were behind this, where yet this Phase 6, do we require them to put a CBU in Phase 6 but not the previous phases?
Well, I think, you know, and I will be happy to ask our august city attorney that question. But my personal feeling is what he's probably gonna wind up telling us is that, developments that are already approved, are vested in what the regulations were at the time they were approved.
I think we discussed that exact point when he was here at the last meeting. And he did say that exact, well, I'm not saying exact, but he brought up that.
Yeah, it's, because one of the things you gotta keep in mind, and I've probably said this before, and I'll probably say it again, but when you look at subdivision approval, it's, unless we're talking about some little two-lot deal, okay, it's typically two steps. You have the preliminary plat, which looks at the development of the whole property, and then you have a final plat that may be like phase one, or it might be the whole property, depending on what the developer decides to do. But it may be a series of phases, okay? The truly important decision is the preliminary plat, which I've always felt is kind of a misnomer, because the whole concept of something that's preliminary, is that it's, not really, something that's fixed. But the thing to understand about the preliminary plat is, once the preliminary plat is approved, that gives the developer the authority to go forward with getting his engineering plans approved and begin constructing the public improvements, which means this guy is going to start spending thousands of dollars, putting in these improvements. Well, because of that situation, he becomes what they call vested in the approval, because you can't go back after that point and make some dramatic change, in the project, that he's already spent thousands of dollars on, based on your preliminary approval, okay? So, even though, the quote-unquote final plat, makes it sound like something that we're carving in stone, the final plat is really just a checkoff. All you're doing is making sure that what they're getting ready to record conforms to what you approved as a preliminary plat. Okay? And that's it. Because like I said, you can't go into the final plat and make some dramatic change that could totally turn his development upside down. Okay? So, we're requiring in this amendment that they submit this information on the CBUs to us at the preliminary plat stage, because that's, the important, excuse me, because, in terms of the preliminary plat, if the guy's going to do it in phases, typically you'd like to see a phase plan as part of that preliminary plat approval, which means that he would have to show you in those phases where the mailboxes are going to be located. And, of course, as we talked last month, the whole idea of doing it in terms of the mailboxes being located in each phase is so that, a person's mailbox is actually within a certain proximity of their home, as opposed to all of them being, like at the entrance to the subdivision, and you live, way the heck back. Well, like, you take Montclair, for example, when you come in off Oak Grove, to get all the way back to where Phase 6 is located, you gotta go all the way around and over and down and around, so, you wouldn't necessarily want all of the mailboxes up there by Oak Grove, if your house is, way the heck down at the end of the street somewhere. So, I don't know, I feel like I've gone all the way around the world to come.
You'll probably explain that again, but it was very helpful.
Well, I'm just wondering if I addressed your question.
Yes, you did.
Okay. Anything else?
Any other questions, comments?
Okay. What we're going to do you know, we have to have an advertised public hearing in order to recommend this to the board. So if this draft looks good to you guys at this point, we'll go ahead and advertise this for your approval at the October meeting, okay? Now, because we're advertising it, that doesn't mean that this is frozen now. You know, if something comes to mind between now and October, we can still make changes in it, okay? So don't want you guys to think like, oh, well, gosh, you know, I wish I'd have thought about that before. You know, you still got time if you want to make a change. Now, the only other item on the agenda is the comprehensive plan update. And as you recall, at our last meeting, you know, it was discussed about trying to get an electronic version of the plan so that, you know, it could be enlarged. And we have finally gotten that. In fact, we had one, but somehow the file got corrupted and we couldn't do anything with it. And so we got back with the consultant, and he has sent us a new version of the draft plan. And what we've been discussing is emailing that out to everybody. Now, the question that I have is, on your computers at home, do you have Adobe Acrobat?
Yes.
Do you know, do you have Acrobat?
I think I do.
Okay. What about you, Mr. Ashworth, do you know?
I'm not sure if I do or not.
Okay. The reason I'm asking is because that's what the copy that we have is on.
They sent it in that format.
You know, so, anyway, we're gonna send it out to everybody, and hopefully you'll be able to look at it. If you can't, let us know.
We also discussed maybe getting a couple of copies of, like, larger.
Like doing them 11 by 17. You know,
Specifically the maps, it was just hard to,
Yeah.
it was hard to.
I know we mentioned too, having them come down and.
yeah.
Or
and-
sort of Zoom.
Yeah.
Or do a Zoom.
Yeah, we're still working on that.
All right.
Yeah. No, we have not forgotten that. Yeah. We're still trying to get that together. Because I tell you what, you know, just getting this electronic version, I mean, you know, she was checking all her files, I was checking all of my files to see if we had another copy of it. You know, we were talking to the people at the UPS who had made the copies that we handed out to everybody, you know, and we finally got the copy from the consultant. I guess it was just last week was when we got it.
Thursday or Friday.
Yeah, you know, it was, that's why there wasn't anything in the packet concerning that agenda item, because, you know, we just kind of got to that point. But that's my report on that, unless anyone has any questions. Okay.
Appreciate all you did for that, too.
Thank you, BJ.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And Krista being the Lone Ranger here like this thing. Good job. Well, if that's it, do a motion to adjourn, or?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
My favorite motion of the night.